schools need to be designed with an end in mind, but actually, most importantly, they need to be as flexible as possible to allow anything to happen. So how can we design a school that no matter what happens in terms of teaching, learning, trends in education, can still be a viable building in 100 years' time?
Is there too much of a business approach to education here?
The cost of education is increasing, but also at the same time there are new propositions coming onto the market to ensure that cost is kept low and affordable with good quality, and that is really driven by the government, the Knowledge Fund, KHDA, who drive kind of the school agenda, private school agenda here.
Charlotte Borghesi, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I want to get this straight. So you are founder and managing director of Kidzink.
Correct.
And then you also have CODA,
Yeah.
which is the architectural arm of Kidzink.
That's right.
Established 2017.
Yep.
About 280 employees.
Yes.
Okay, so how do you get into the world of designing spaces and furniture in schools?
Okay, that's a really long story, so I'll try and do the very short version.
We've only got half an hour.
Exactly. So back in I've actually got 7 children with my husband. So 5 are mine, 2 stepchildren, but 7 in total. And at that time, we had 3 very young children at a small nursery called Children's Oasis. It was actually the oldest British nursery in Dubai, established 25 years before we acquired it. Anyway, the owner said they were closing down the nursery. At the time, I was working for Mars Incorporated as general manager for the region. And she was closing it because she wanted to retire and move to the US with her grandchild. So my husband and I said, this nursery is amazing. It should not close. Let's try and keep it open. Right, yeah, 3,
attending there?
Yeah, there were. There were, I think, 1, 2, and 3 at the time. And we made an offer to buy it from her, just as a sort of investment. We knew it couldn't be wrong. We had no idea what to offer, but it was we offered something that we were not too worried about losing. But at the same time, we thought it was the right price for the nursery. So we bought the nursery. And suddenly we're the owner of, a nursery having 160 children in the middle of Jumeirah. In that moment, my husband and I had been talking a lot about how to get out of the world of corporate multinationals, and work for ourselves. And we'd looked at various different businesses and what could we do. I knew that I wasn't going to leave my career to run a nursery school, but actually the owner of the nursery also founded a company in 1999 called Kidzink. It was actually Kids Incorporated at that time. And she was distributing furniture made in Germany to nurseries and kindergartens across the Middle East. She'd actually also closed that company in preparation to emigrating to the US with her grandchild. And I made an offer to buy that license. It just had 1 month, actually, of expiry on it. So bought that license, resigned from Mars, and went on a mission to look at how I could build an entrepreneurial business in education. What I learned through I guess the next 6 months, visiting all the ex-clients and customers of Kidzink, was that there was absolutely zero design thinking in school design. Not only from a furniture point of view, but the whole kind of interior concept of a school.
So schools would generally sort of focus on what was going on in the classroom, right?
Correct.
Curriculums.
Yeah.
And you were thinking, is there something else that I could be doing to enhance the experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Clearly what happens in the classroom in terms of what's taught, the teaching and learning, is absolutely mission critical. But actually, environments and places inspire people, actually.
So is there, I'm curious about this concept, is there a science behind it, or is there an instinct that's sort of guiding you, or the instinct starts and then you do your research and you figure out, oh, there is something here? Yeah,
well, at the beginning when I started, it was definitely an instinct. An instinct actually fueled by, if you look at the corporate world, actually, look at the big companies trying to work on employee productivity, performance, staff retention. They're all, and they have been for many years, investing a large amount of money into making the workplace a great space to work, to ensure that they have longer term retention on their staff, better outputs. But this wasn't really happening in schools. And essentially, kind of as humans, space and architecture and design is having an impact on how we feel and therefore how we perform. So I guess I had a hunch behind it at the beginning, and related also to my own experience. Sorry, a bit croaky this morning. My own experiences. So I decided to sort of play with that idea and take kind of evidence just found on the web, really, and other examples. And actually, most recently, 8 years on, we're just actually in the process of writing a book which supports all of that kind of hunch and gut feeling with evidence. So there is a lot of evidence behind how design impacts productivity, performance, learning.
So this brings up an interesting question, which is if you're in that position where you think there's something there, to take that next step, are you speaking to teachers? Are you speaking to other parents? Or are you having conversations with children? Are you seeing what sort of works with your own children? And then you're figuring out, oh, there is a different way to do this, or I guess a better way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been able to draw on a lot of my own personal experience and my friendship network in terms of their children, their experiences. But actually, when I built my business, I made a very clear decision to ensure that we speak to all stakeholders. So a lot of design decisions and furniture decisions were made exclusively with developers or kind of senior leaders that maybe not having ever or current experience in the classroom. So we've always made it our business to talk to educators, teachers, diverse range of staff across schools, as well as school leaders, as well as students. So recently we designed for Talim Dubai British School Jumeirah, which is the new school that opened in September on the canal. After we designed the school, we took a bunch of our staff's children to the school to explore the school and give their feedback. And they all went to different schools, and we used that feedback then to actually drive our next project and how to improve future projects. So kind of very experiential sort of approach, I would say.
So walk me through the process, how it happens, where somebody, a potential client approaches you and says, what would you do for a school for children of a British curriculum, for instance?
Yeah. And
you then ask them a bunch of questions about, well, what is it that you're trying to achieve? What are the grades? What are the ages? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean, at a very basic level, we'll work on their requirements for facilities. We call it an accommodation schedule. So they'll say, okay, we want a school for 2,000 children. That's maybe 5 form entry, so 5 classes of each year group. We have a kind of standard calculation when it comes to how many science labs they need for number of students. So I'd say that's a very basic level. That's really essential to get to, that basic requirement to facilitate the curriculum that the school has in mind. Different types of schools have different requirements. So we know we're used to designing all kinds of schools, so British, American, Indian, IB. Yes, it does vary because actually the content of the curriculum, is different. So we need different types of spaces in certain curriculum schools. That's at a very basic level. But I would say, beyond that, we want to really understand kind of what's the spirit of the school, what's really making this school different. What do the developer or education group have in mind that's actually going to really create value beyond just the basic curriculum? And then how can we ensure that the design will facilitate that?
So you would have started out building furniture for schools, and now you're into also designing the spaces as well. You have the furniture and then you have the space. Is there a difference, or is it meant that they're supposed to work together? Like, this is the part where, and that working together then helps facilitate a better environment for children to learn?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly why we got into designing schools. So actually, we started off with furniture. And what we realised is that operators and clients, they usually bring the furniture in at the last minute of the project. And when we
it's an afterthought,
yeah,
no
it's
doubt,
an
right?
afterthought. And there's so many things that can't be done to an optimal level because actually the requirements weren't considered in the initial design stage of the building. So in my office, everyone was always complaining about the architects and the interior designers. Well, if only the architect had thought about this, or if only they'd considered this from a lighting point of view, we'd be able to create something better in terms of a learning space with the furniture. And that's what led us to, first of all, get into interior design and then eventually into architectural design. So if we considered the requirements of the actual students and their experience at the beginning of the design process, everything ties together in a much more seamless way.
Is there also, so you say you work on a school this year, and then, of course, a generation of kids will go through that school.
Yeah.
Is there then the responsibility on the school, say, in 10 or 15 years, if need be, to sort of bring somebody such as yourself and to say, okay, the way we learn or the way children learn today has to change, and so the space has to reflect that as well?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge actually when we're designing today a greenfield. So we do two types of work mainly. One is brand new schools, and the other is kind of refurbishing and regenerating schools. So when we design a school has to be relevant for many years, not just 15 years actually. And we talk about a concept in our practice as, the 100-year school. So how can we design a school that no matter what happens in terms of teaching, learning, trends in education, can still be a viable building in 100 years' time? Key to that is really flexibility. And it's not even 15 years where schools start to change stuff, even, kind of a generational thing. It's actually when a school opens, yes, they plan for 2,000 children, but in the first few years, they've maybe got 300, 500, 600. That's how schools ramp up. And they start to accommodate the actual space in very different ways, than it was intended. And then when they grow with more students, they have to kind of reaccommodate and replan the space. So schools need to be designed with an end in mind, but actually, most importantly, they need to be as flexible as possible to allow anything to happen. So 8 years ago when I started this business, everyone was talking about technology in furniture. So we need tables with power cables built in, and that led to actually architects and designers putting floor boxes in the floor. Actually, that's the most, or lacking, flexibility completely, because then once the floor box is in a place, the cable's in the table, you can't move it. So actually, 8 years on, we put all the power around the wall, which is kind of a very traditional thing happening, years and years ago. And actually, we don't put any cables in a table, and that's allowing for the greatest flexibility, because also technology is evolving. And nowadays, you don't need to charge computer even every day for the requirements of a student. So, that's what I would say for greenfields. When it comes to what we call brownfields, so redevelopment, we work a lot where groups and clients buy schools and then they want to upgrade them. That's happening a lot in this region. And often the requirement can come to us as a very basic requirement. Okay, so let's replace all the tables and chairs, or, let's do a new reception, to make the school look more welcoming. How we like to approach it is go and have a sort of more holistic look at the school, to look at actually what will make the biggest difference to students. So we worked on a project for one of our clients. The school is Horizon International School. It's a very old school, very solid school in Jumeirah. Cognita, a large group, bought that school. And I went with my team to have a look around the school, and we saw the biggest impact we could have on the students in that school was actually refurbish all of the washrooms and the changing facilities, rather than mess around with putting new tables and chairs. The tables and chairs were completely functional.
So that brings up another interesting idea that I have as I'm listening to you, which is how much say do the students have?
Yeah.
Or is it just, adults going in and saying, oh, well, we could do this or we could do that? Do you get that feedback? Or is it up to the schools to sort of say, we've spoken to our students and this is what they want?
Yeah. Schools hardly ever do that proactively, but we do push schools to do that. So we even run with some of our clients workshops with students in the school. We bring them into our office even. And recently for Nord Anglia, we worked with the students to design their wellbeing space. So it is something that is more driven by our sort of intentional push. But it's really invaluable, actually.
So I want to get to the well-being in a moment, but if I have young children and I'm trying to figure out where to send them to school, as a parent, what should I be looking for? I guess the first thought is well, you might not know when your child is 4 or 5 how that child is best suited to learn. But as a parent, what are some of the green flags when I walk into a school that tells me this is a place that's going to suit what I think my child needs?
Yeah, I would say the first thing to look for is actually the feeling you get when you walk into a school. So I think, as parents, we have, very strong connection to our children. We know our children well, even if they're just 4 at the time. And the first thing is to feel that, okay, my children are going to be happy and comfortable coming to this place. That is not necessarily anything you can put your direct finger on.
So it's a vibe almost.
Yeah, it's a vibe. I would say for me, that's the most important thing. And even when I'm evaluating a school for my own children, do I feel they'll be happy here? Do I get that feeling inside every morning they're going to be happy, smiling, coming through those doors? The second part of that is the teachers. In the end, schools can be many things. They can be brands, they can be buildings, they can be the leadership team, who have got years of experience. But in the end, it's the teachers who your children are going to have the most time with. And are they going to be happy and inspired and comfortable learning from those teachers?
So you had mentioned well-being, and I guess I would ask, that must be one of the areas in which things have changed, evolved.
Yeah.
Where there are, I don't want to say spaces for people with mental health issues, but it's more, I think, a general well-being spaces.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is definitely something that you guys incorporate into the schools now?
Yeah, that's actually the whole kind of concept of our book that we're writing on school design, which is how schools should facilitate well-being. If you don't feel well, you can't do well. And how you become well or how you experience well-being is through your senses. So there's lots of evidence and science now behind our senses. Before we used to just have 5 senses. Now scientists tell us we have, up to 22 different senses. And how we ensure that all of those senses are stimulated in the right way in a learning environment is really critical. And there's a lot of design strategies nowadays that kind of can support the right sensory experience in any kind of environment, but definitely a school. I mean, take nature, biophilia, which is the experience of nature in an environment. So the use of water, greenery, look at this room, the use of green is on purpose in this environment to make you feel more relaxed, at ease with nature. They trigger the right senses to encourage a feeling and a sense of well-being. And there's a lot more evidence and science and data behind this now.
And with science and data and with things that schools are doing nowadays, we also know as parents who have been here for a little bit of time, we recognize that the cost of education here has gone up an awful lot.
Yeah.
I don't want to say where does it tap out, but I'm more concerned about, not does it have to be as expensive as it is, but I do wonder at a certain point where a lot of the old expat packages are not what they once were.
Yeah.
And so parents are having to, what might have been savings in the past is now having to go to education. And from a very early age, as opposed to them being in year 12 and it being costing a lot, it's costing a lot from the very early stages. Do you ever see that? Is there too much of a business approach to education here?
Okay, that's a big question. So I'll start with the first part of the question. I think the wonderful thing about Dubai is there is, in the end, something for everyone. So actually what I see from a private education market is there are very high quality schools at the entry price point, and there are increasingly high quality schools at a very premium price point. And Dubai some way has facilitated that across everything it does, whether it's a restaurant, and you can get amazing food in an Indian restaurant costing nothing, and the same, costing a lot, and, with maybe better service and experience. And so I think, schools are exactly the same as that. So I know, and we work with groups who are really trying to tackle both. How do we offer a really solid, high-quality education at a very affordable price point? But at the same, how do we meet the needs to deliver schools that offer a premium and luxury experience for those high-net-worth families who also want that? So I do think that, yes, the cost of education is increasing, but also at the same time, there are new propositions coming onto the market to ensure that cost is kept low and affordable with good quality. And that is really driven by the government, the Knowledge Fund, KHDA, who drive kind of the school agenda, private school agenda here.
What do you think of the rating system that KHDA has? Do you think does it take into account furniture, spacing, the designs of a school?
Yeah, I think the rating has massively improved the quality of schools. So when I arrived here 15 years ago, even before I got in the industry, I had much less confidence in the education being offered than I do today. And I am so confident in the improvement in education here through the KHDA driving that I would be very happy to try and keep my children at university in the UAE as well. So I think, yes, it's in many of the areas, it is very basic KHDA ratings, but in many of the areas, it's far more complex in terms of how schools need to deliver to be successful and rated highly. And they have placed more importance on space and the importance of space over time. And they look to ensure that schools, so even talk about well-being, KHDA are rating the schools on well-being spaces. That sound of just saying that out loud actually sounds a bit contradictory, because actually the whole school should be a place of well-being. However, in the absence of that in every school, KHDA are focusing to ensure that all schools are creating better spaces to allow students to have places to retreat to, if they've got sensory overload or if they just want to chill out, take a moment, the pressure's too high. All of these things that are important in driving academic and development outcomes.
And one thing, and I don't want to put you on a spot here, but I'm going to ask this question only because I know I have lots of former colleagues, friends. Their kids spend an awful lot of time on the buses in the morning.
Yeah.
Is there, from a mental health well-being point of view, is there anything that you think the schools can be doing so that either the experience somehow on the bus is better, or their kids just aren't on school buses for as long as they are?
Yeah, I think it's a really good topic. I would never put my children on a school bus. And I'm fortunate to be able to not have to, but I understand that many parents aren't in the same situation as us. I think it's a massive topic that needs an intervention, and I don't think actually anyone's working on it. And I don't think even schools are considering it today.
No, I think what, sort of interrupt you there, I think one of the issues that I know, it's almost more from a business point of view where they're looking at it. So for instance, I know the RTA, there are options for parents where if they want to send their kids in a taxi, they can do that. Because they've recognized that there's a chance to make some money there. Nothing wrong with that. But, you hear some of these stories where kids are having to get on the school bus, at 6:15 in the morning, and then they might not get to school for another 90 minutes.
Yeah, I think the government are addressing some of that in terms of the way they're putting controls around new developments and schools in those developments. So we're working on some schools in a couple of new developments at the moment. The developers are not allowed to expand the number of houses in those developments until a new school opens. So I think the government are trying to control it at the root cause, which is how to build schools in a community that's fit for that community. So that's ensuring also that the operator who's brought in to run that school is going to put a school at the right price point that's going to meet the needs of that community. You know, traffic here is a massive issue. So even outside of school buses, you know, how can you even send your children on the metro to get to school? So one of the things I've been telling a lot of my clients, you know, why don't you open a sixth form centre on the metro line? Then all the kids can go to school on the metro. But actually, if you try and get on the metro at rush hour, it's completely packed as well. So is it safe, secure? You know, all of these kind of questions come up. Although you do go to big cities, and my friends who live in London, their children at 14 go on the underground to get to school across London. And yes, sure, Dubai is far more safer than, you know, traversing London at 8 a.m. in the morning. So I think it has to change first and foremost in terms of the ease of which one can get around the city.
I was speaking with an urban planner the other day, and he was talking about Dubai needs to do a better job of creating more 15-minute cities.
Yes.
Right? So that your office, your children's school, your entertainment, you know, all the essentials are within 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I do think it's, right now there are lots of neighborhoods throughout the city, throughout the country really. But I think it struggles a little bit when something that you need, either your work or your children's school, is not within that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that's where I think one of the challenges comes
Yeah, and the
in.
problem with schools, actually, the ones that create the traffic problem are all these destination schools. So actually, you know, an interesting fact is that in premium destination schools, less than 15% of children travel by bus to get there. Because often they have a longer commute than, you know, 25, 35 minutes. And on a bus, that would usually double. You know, and that's such a waste of our kids' times. And actually, they're more likely to be the parents that can afford drivers, or, you know, they have one parent not working, so they can take the kids and run around after them for school trips. So I think, you know, destination schools are a problem. And, you know, we also see it here when the kids are on holiday. It's bliss getting to work, right?
Yes, absolutely it is.
But it can be a great idea to actually enhance the, you know, the quality of the bus experience, what you could do on the bus with the children to enhance their well-being and make sure that time is well spent. Yeah, another concept I like around schools that is not really here yet, which is this whole kind of concept of day boarding. You know, so you drop your children very early, you know, they maybe get breakfast at school, there's kind of a homework group or a play group depending on their age. You know, then after school, all of their activities, including homework, dinner, etc., is provided by the schools. So if you're a, you know, dual working family, you know, it makes the, you know, the whole kind of day, you know, far more inside the school, far more, you know, manageable, but it would also reduce a lot the kind of traffic
and I think,
issues.
you know, when we were talking about buses and you had said, I think it's something that needs to be looked into. I also think that if you think, you know, school and our daily 40, 50-hour work week is very traditional, I think. And one of the, and Dubai does a really good job of this, where they think outside the box, right? So, for instance, using your scenario there, where maybe children are spending more time in school, so maybe they're only going to school 4 days a week instead of, you know, the full 5 days a week. And maybe there is an opportunity because you're doing everything there. So by the time you go home, it's as though it's free time and sleeping. And I think that, I don't want to sound like I've drank the Kool-Aid about Dubai, but Dubai does do a really good job where they think about these things from let's sort of take it all apart, and if we were to build it fresh, how would we do it? And I think that's really, I think there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, I agree with that.
One of the other things I want to talk about, because you had talked about activities and stuff. Now, you're a 2-time world champion sailor.
Yeah.
And how important is it for kids with participating in athletics at school and from an early age? And what are the spaces that you're seeing now that are requirements that might not have been, say, when you started the business in 2017?
Yeah, I think sport is critical for all children, whether they have a dream, an aspiration to go on to be professional athletes or perform at a very high level, to just recreational sport. You know, sport teaches you a lot. Self-discipline, teaches you how to work in a team, you know, how to take hard hits, you know, everything. And, you know, our kids do nothing. You know, we're like sport, 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 you know, and that we believe will set them up for life in a way even more than what they learn at school, which is really important for us as well, but it's nothing like the lessons you get in sport.
Yeah.
I think that sport here in the UAE has grown in schools sort of outside the school. So, you know, all of these clubs, whether they be football or running or netball or whatever they are, which actually, incidentally, also causes traffic issues because you have parents running from school to football to somewhere else to do another activity. So I think schools are starting to look more seriously at how to integrate the whole sporting experience within the school. Cognita are a good example of that. They launched a company called Enrich Me, which is actually offering different pathways within sport to all of the students in their group of schools, you know, to enhance the level of sport they can offer, the diversity of sport, and all of the different components, because it's not just about learning to play netball and then learning to play and compete. It's actually also understanding about nutrition, about mobility, you know, about fitness, strength, you know, all the things that come with that. So that's a really good initiative, I would say. But in the schools, still the facilities are quite one-dimensional. So the brief we usually get is, yes, we want a swimming pool, 2 indoor courts, you know, a football, either FIFA size or 2 junior, you know, so it's very conventional. And there's probably an opportunity here for a more diverse set of sports. So if we look at the Olympics, look at all the new sports that are coming into the Olympics, you know, where are those sports inside our schools? You know, they're not really here today.
Do you find that educators, the people you're dealing with, I guess you're dealing with the educators as well as the business people, are they too traditional, too conservative, just because they have a belief that education has to be a particular way?
I think the main drive behind traditional here is the fact that it's largely a private school market, very competitive. So often we go to schools with wild ideas, big visions, but in the end, it's quite a big, bold move to do something different to all the other schools in the area. So actually, the UAE, I don't know if you know, is the second largest private school market in the world. But
After China.
After China, but it's actually more dynamic than China because you've got all your schools within a very close, you know, tight radius of each other. So pretty much all the private schools are competing against each other.
Do you think we get to a point, because people will talk about Dubai being a melting pot.
Yeah.
Now, I've for many years said it's not. And the reason I say that is because there are so few points throughout the day where there's a melting pot aspect. Yes, in the office, I would say.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about education, you know, Indians will send their kids to Indian curriculum school, Brits to Brit, North Americans to North American, you know, Filipinos to Filipino.
Yeah.
Do you think we get to that point where schools are a little bit more, and I understand why, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to be sending their kids back home for university and they want to make that transition as easy as possible.
Yeah.
Do you think, though, we get to the point in the UAE where maybe schools are more of a melting pot so that it doesn't matter where you're going for university because maybe you're going to stay here?
Yeah.
Because I think that in the past, that would have been an issue, right? Everybody would have to leave. And you said, oh, maybe my kids would stay here for university.
Yeah, definitely. It's a massive trend at the moment that more children are staying here. So schools here used to be a pyramid. So you would have massive intake in the early years and it would taper off to the top, you know, in the GCSE or 16 to 18-year-olds because actually families were sending their children back to their home countries. So it's really important. Like if you were going to send your children back to Canada, you want them in a system that's going to feed in to ensure they're going to be successful when they move back. You know, and that happens to be in a school whereby most of their peers will be from the same country or, you know, broadly the same country, America, Canada. You know, that's not happening anymore. You know, and families are staying here. We came here for 3 years. We've been here 15 years.
Everybody came for 3 years.
But there were many more people moving back or moving their children back. You know, now the most successful schools, you know, do not have more children in the early years. and less children in the upper years. And actually, that's one of the biggest challenges for the most successful schools. They were, years ago, they had 8 form entry, 9 form entry at year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and then maybe 2 form entry in the upper school. Now they have to turn children away because they just don't have the space for them in the schools. So actually, an opportunity in the market here is 6th form colleges, to actually accommodate those children. But yeah, I think I am seeing more schools with more diverse cultural mix. And I would say, like, looking at my own experience throughout my career, having worked all over the world, the skills to be able to deal with people from different cultures is far more critical than actually, what you graduate in at the end of the day and how well you graduate. We have, I think I'm correct in saying, 18 nationalities in our office. In the manufacturing side, we have largely Indian, but in the office, we're very diverse. And actually, a lot of the challenges in terms of communication is just the understanding of the cultural norms between someone who's Indian versus someone who's Turkish or British or Italian. I'm married to an Italian, and just to understand each other in terms of, our style of the way we approach things, is...
I had, when I was doing my undergrad, I had a Japanese professor, Ota Sensei, and he used to say that you can overcome just about everything as a married couple. It could be different religions, it could be different languages, different socioeconomic backgrounds. The one thing he argued is that education. You had to both value education the same amount.
Yes.
And that's where you could find the common ground that you could build a successful relationship on.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think, I know in my case with my wife, it was certainly the case where so much was different, but we both valued education. And I think we were able to build upon that.
Yeah.
But you interest me because you've switched gears throughout your career.
Yeah.
So if you look back when in your previous life as an executive, was there anything that your company or companies did or didn't do that you wanted to make sure, because you have almost 300 employees working with you now, and you said, I definitely want to make sure that this happens, or I definitely want to make sure that I don't include that aspect of work life in the office?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when my husband and I both worked for more than 20 years in big, large corporate multinationals, so when we started our own business, we wanted to get rid of all bureaucracy. So bureaucracy is many things in an organization, but starting with just HR processes. So actually it took us, we only hired someone in HR 6 months ago, and that's just because we just couldn't manage the expansion ourselves anymore. But what we always found with HR people, they bring, processes, rules, regulations.
And they say one thing and they do another.
Yeah. And so we've been through that in the last 6 months and, putting like policies. So we never had policies in the company. And then we started to put them. And then actually, literally about 4 weeks ago, have you ever read the book, Erwin Mayer, Netflix, The Culture?
No.
Okay, this amazing book. So Netflix don't have any policies. So we reread this book, actually, my husband and I, and we sent a message to the organisation the next morning. So scrap all the policies that have been issued in the last 6 months. Forget it. So we don't have expense policies. We just tell people, like, use your common sense, spend the money if it's your own. And we realised that sometimes we're putting policies in because maybe one employee has broken the trust.
Yes.
So then we use that as the lowest common denominator. So this is something we're really acutely aware of.
I wish you could have run the last company I was at, because HR would treat things like you were checking a box.
Yeah.
They would say one thing and then they would 100% do something else. And I think one of the things, I'm not the biggest fan of social media, but I've recognized that it's done a lot of good. One being conversations about mental health.
Yeah.
The other thing is that you'll see so many HR professionals on social media, and they will talk about HR is there to protect the company.
Yeah.
They're not there for your well-being.
Yeah.
And I think we take that for granted. So if you work at a company where there's an HR person that now has the title People and Culture,
Yeah.
that's somehow supposed to make you feel more comfortable and maybe let your guard down. But that's not the case at all.
Yeah, well, actually, great people protect companies. So actually, you need to figure out what it takes to make great people thrive. So we don't have a holiday policy. We never track holidays.
Fantastic.
We nearly got into tracking holidays because once an employee we realised was completely taking the mickey. Then we're like, oh, maybe we should. And then we're like, no, remember, scrap it. It's just that one person.
But then in those cases, and this is where what companies don't like to do is then you have a mature, proper, serious conversation with that person.
Yeah.
And you say, look, as opposed to sending out an email to 300 people,
Exactly.
when you're only trying to address one.
Exactly.
And all you have to do is have that awkward conversation with that one person who's taking advantage of the system.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is the biggest thing when we left corporate multiple. Like, we don't want any of this bureaucracy. Also, we don't want big meetings, people to sit in meetings. Like, if you're in a meeting and you feel this is not relevant to you, you've got nothing to say, just leave the meeting.
100%.
Actually...
If you do that, though, people get offended.
Yeah.
And you have
But
to...
actually, it's more offensive to sit there and waste people's time.
Yes, I agree with that. But since you've called the meeting, now the ball's in your court. And if I were to take that initiative and leave, I'm now offending you, and I'm not playing by the rules, and I'm not a team player. I'm starting to get riled up now. You've triggered something. And that, to me, is a waste of everybody's time. But too often in corporate life, people want to be seen to be playing the game.
Yeah.
And so some days I would have 5 or 6 meetings. And I would say, but I have my job to do. And I don't want to go to these meetings. But if you don't go to the meetings, then you're perceived to be not a team player. And then ultimately that's going to hurt you.
Yeah, this is exactly the culture we do not want to have in our organisation. So culture is really special. When we meet people, we're first and foremost evaluating them on the cultural fit. And actually often we're interviewing people without even jobs in mind. But if we find the right people culturally,
That's nice.
we find a way to hire them.
Good for you.
And we've done that a lot, and that's how we built the company. So people never leave us, actually. We've
Fantastic.
got probably, a much higher retention rate than I ever had when I was working in Mars or Reckitt's, and they have a much bigger resource to be able to retain people. Actually.
Because this is what I've discovered. You talk about common sense, and I'm a big fan of, like, let common sense rule the day, is what I would say in previous jobs, where we have a discussion and there's a disagreement, but it's like, okay, well, what makes most sense? Forget about the fact I'm the boss or you're the boss. Like, just go with what's commonsensical. And too often, that makes people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because you're empowering them or if because ultimately the decision is with them and some people don't want the buck to stop with them.
Yeah.
But if you can, like, I think you've done an amazing thing from what you've told me, but I think you've also messed up the careers of some of your employees because if they ever go anywhere else, they're going to be messed up because they're going to go, but this doesn't make sense. So last question I want to ask you is, from a professional sense, and this is always very telling, because when I've publicly declared ways in which I've messed up, the response that I get is usually the most overwhelming. So what's your biggest professional fail?
Yeah, that's a really hard question to ask because, I'm messing up all the time. And I don't really ever look at anything as a failure. So I thought, usually ask that question a lot, like, what's your biggest failure personally, professionally? I can't really tell you one. We're making...
Because there's so many.
There's so many.
Nice.
But we never look at them as, like my husband and I, we're just very pragmatic to say, okay, what next? What did we learn? How do we move on? And, never dwell on bad things. I've got really glass half full or glass 90% full. So with every thing that goes wrong, something good always comes out of it if you focus on the good things. So I've racked my brains long and hard to try and answer this question. I can't give you an answer.
Good for you.
Yeah.
That's nice. Charlotte Borghesi, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.